Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Refine and Shine podcast. I'm super excited about my guest today. Very rare do I have somebody that I'm interviewing in the same state. So when I get that, it's a pure joy. But I love to interview people throughout the world. But this one's just special. So today, my guest is Jenny Beres. She is the founder of Pink Shark PR, a woman-owned Los Angeles agency that helps innovative brands and leaders in fintech, AI, and consumer spaces be seen in their best light. Her work centers on optimizing the stories people and their companies tell, with her clients regularly featured in top publications such as the New York Times and Forbes. She is passionate about bridging confidence, identity, and visibility, supporting others as they refine their message and let their true selves shine. So thank you, Jenny, for being on today.
Hello, Angelina. Thank you for having me, and hello to fellow California girl.
I love that. I just am super excited because, it's the AI space is not, I work it in my day job, and it's not a lot of females do not get involved in the AI space. And I've been very blessed to have two, you're my second female entrepreneur, woman who has talked about AI. And so kind of just tell us how you got into where you are today, how you developed this company, what you do, and how you help others shine.
Sure. So I love that you point that out because, a lot of my clients that I work in, they're in fintech, as you mentioned. AI and fintech now are kind of, you can't work in any tech industry now without AI being a part of it. But I also have some clients that are very deep in generative AI, and that is their focus. And I feel really lucky to be, working. Obviously, I am not a technical person myself. I work on the comm side of things, but before I had Pink Shark PR, I had a small copywriting business that I pulled out of thin air while I was a waitress. And I really was fascinated at the time by the tech industry because they felt like my people. I'm somebody who is a very quick start person. If there's something that I want to do, I kind of just jump in and figure it out as I go. As I got older, I've learned to still do that, and then also manage that with things like stability. But in my 20s, I was like, I was in my very early mid 20s, and I was like, I'm going to try this copywriting business, and I thought the tech people were so cool because they just also seemed to just jump on in. At the time, I did work with a ton of men because, obviously tech is very male dominated, but back then more so. I definitely can say I've seen more female representation, over the last 15 years. I just cold emailed people. I knew that I was a good writer. I knew that I was a good communications person. I didn't really know what that meant, but I cold emailed, different tech founders. And I was like, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool. I think I'd be able to help with the messaging. I'm new, but I have a lot of raw talent. And people just took a chance on me. And so I was able to build my first business that way. And as tech evolved, obviously the clients that I worked with evolved. And I really found my home in fintech, which obviously AI plays a big part in the fintech space now. And after the copywriting business, I was working with a client during that, and I thought, man, this campaign we're doing, the stuff we're doing is really good. I should tell TechCrunch about it. And so I just emailed a reporter at TechCrunch, just totally green, didn't know what I was doing. And 30 seconds later, they responded, booked an interview, published a feature with that founder. And so that was kind of my foray into, oh, cool, I'm going to learn all of the PR stuff, all of the comm support, because I already really understood the industry.
I love that. So it took courage, right? It took courage and just like, hey, I know I'm made for more, and I'm just going to go out there and do it. And I love how you said that you just go out there and you just like, you think of something and sometimes you move really fast, and now you've learned to be more stable. But that's the thing, like I feel that it's really important that like when God puts something on your heart, your higher power, whatever you believe in, that is that nudge that you are meant to do that. And what we do is we kind of brush it off and like, oh no, that's just a thought. Like, but that's really important that you go and you kind of jump in with that. And I love how you said you started as a waitress and then you worked, you thought, oh, I'm going to do this. And then, copyright business. And then you got into the PR business. And so kind of tell us what you do and how do you help your clients?
So I work with clients who are really looking to get more organic visibility. We know that we're living in a time where people are very skeptical of advertising. Not that advertising doesn't have its place, but when you can have organic visibility, people talking about you, that's why I say I work in earned media because it really is earned. And that's what I love about working with reporters. I connect our clients with reporters that I think would be interested in their work, that would champion their work. And what's cool about it is the thing that can sometimes make PR frustrating is what makes it extremely valuable. Reporters are not an extension of your marketing team. Journalists serve a very important function in society. They're there to tell a true story. They're there to ask questions. They're not there to promote your business. And so if you have a very positive rapport with a reporter and you have press that is positive and in your favor, that is worth its weight in gold because the public understands that that reporter was not paid to talk to you. You did not pay. That's not a piece of advertising. And so it can really elevate a brand. It can really lock down somebody's industry dominance. It can really show, who are the leaders in a space. And it makes a very, very big dent in how you're perceived, how you connect with customers. And it's all rooted in storytelling about the founders, storytelling about where they come from, what their struggles were, what problems they're solving in the world.
I love that. I love that. So how do when you tell a story, like I love how you talked about the founders, like because a lot of times, like have found from starting my podcast, when I hear why somebody founded an industry, a business, or things like that, there was a reason behind it. And it's kind of like what my whole podcast is about. It's like
Sure.
there was something that happened to us in order to us to wanted to refine and shine. And, a setback or just a curiosity. And I love how you're helping people tell that story and say, because you started this company because of this, or you started, whatever it is. And so, how do you go about helping them telling that story? What is it that you do, and what do you offer?
So usually, it's really funny. People don't always realize that their story is the interesting part. I think that founders, startup founders, tech founders in particular, they're really in a pressure cooker. They're trying to raise money. They're trying to get that visibility. Every minute feels like a dollar burned sometimes. And so sometimes, depending, and it doesn't really matter the stage of business, sometimes people are so focused on their company and what product they're producing that they forget that the product is not interesting at all to the public, or to the reporter. Nobody cares about your product. The people are interested in the people. And so if you don't tell that personal story, then you never connect yourself back to your company and your product. So my job and my team's job is to really figure out, when somebody starts working with us at Pink Shark, I always like to ask, where did you struggle like so much that now you could probably laugh about it because it was so awful? And also, what is unique about you? What connected you to this journey? And what's really interesting, and why I make this point a little bit more heavily for women, is that when I work with men usually they may struggle to give me the story not related to the product, but they never struggle to tell me why they're exceptional. They never tell me what's unusual or unique, or I say this a lot, but it's very true. I'll have a founder who's generally speaking, I do have some exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, they can go back to childhood and tell me what was special, if they were in gifted classes, if what their mom said about them. And I can have a woman who is a founder or a high level executive at an amazing company. They could be Ivy League educated, they could have all kinds of accolades, and they really struggle to tell me what is exceptional about them. And so I think that that's an important point to make, because we all have an exceptional story, but I have noticed that women, even if their exceptional story is very, very obvious, they still struggle to want to or to connect with it themselves. And so my job is to bring that out and to share that with, the reporters that represent the right audience.
I love that. I love that, and I can so relate because I have just recently really started to open up about what my story is and what my background was and why I am who I am today. Like when I first started my launch this podcast, I talked a little bit about why the date was significant, of why I launched, but never really going back into who I am, where I am, and how I became the person I am today. And that's like when sometimes I still struggle. Sometimes when people say, "Well, what can I do for you?" And I'm like, I don't want to ask for anything because I struggle with that. And so I
Sure.
love that you're doing that. I'm really interested in what drives you to do what you do every day.
I am relentless. And any of my friends or my co-founder, anyone who listens to this, my employees, they will laugh at that because I am relentless. Once I decide that I'm going to do something, I will literally have to drop dead before I quit. So I think, when I look back at my life and all of the things that I was interested in, all the things I took a gamble on, all of them were rooted in innovation and communications. I didn't always know that that's what I was pursuing, but it was always some form of storytelling, communications. I have a background as a playwright and a screenwriter. But I really was drawn towards, financial, especially financial innovation. And so once who I wanted to share those gifts with really clicked, me being a business owner, me having this agency, all of that, it's not even an option. I always laugh at the question, like, what keeps you going? Because I just do.
I love that. And I wanted to know is how long has Pink Shark been in business?
So Pink Shark was operating so we officially named it Pink Shark PR in 2018, but we had the company open since 2017 or really 2016. I was just really reluctant to have a PR agency. My business partner and I, we were working the company had a different name. We were doing a lot of consulting, coaching, and then also PR. And I didn't want an agency. And the reason I didn't want an agency is because at that point I had worked closely my entire pretty much adult career life with founders and CEOs. And if I had a dollar for every time they told me they hated their PR agency, I would be in Fiji right now, you know? And so I was really reluctant. Building an agency is a ton of work. I knew it was a ton of work and it was still way more than I still anticipated. And my business partner was like, we have to call it an agency. We are definitely taking on all of these clients. We are doing agency work. We're doing these things. And, you're not going to change, how you do business just because you're an agency. And she was at the airport, on the phone with me while we are having this conversation, and there was a man sitting next to her, and he was wearing a shirt. It was a pink shirt, and it had great whites on it. And she was like, "Oh my God, we're Pink Shark PR." And I was like, "Okay, I guess we are," because the name really it didn't just fit, but it spoke to how we work, being female led, but also being aggressive and top of the industry. And so when she presented me in that moment with the name, I knew it was meant to be.
I love that. I love that. So you said that, people like every time somebody says like the PR, the frustration with PRs. So what would you say would be one misconception people often have about your industry?
Well, PR is not a press release. You don't put one press release out and call it a day. Press release is just a tool in the toolbox, but it is not. It is not the be all end all. A lot of times people get very hung up on, well, I don't want to put out press releases, or are we just putting out press releases, or we need to put out a press release every week, and that is just an horrendous PR strategy. It's not a PR strategy at all. But I would say in this day and age, with how heightened marketing is and how competitive it is for people's attention, along with so many of the shifts that we're seeing in the media. The biggest thing that I think that people in my industry, in my position, are really trying to get across is that we do not own reporters, and that is a wonderful thing. We do not own journalists, and that is a wonderful thing. It makes this so much sweeter. And what I would like to tell everybody, especially if you've tried PR and you haven't heard back, you know, before all of the layoffs, a lot of the media, conglomerates have had a ton of layoffs. And before that happened, it was a reporter would get about there's about 7 PR people or founders pitching to every one reporter. I haven't seen the data since those layoffs have happened, but it would not be crazy to say that that has more than doubled or tripled. So when a reporter shows interest in what you're doing, it is extremely, extremely valuable. And advertising cannot touch that. Now, I do think it's cool to advertise the earned media that you get, but once you secure true media coverage that's earned, you really are in a very special league because not everybody gets that. It's also a game that really requires, you have to think about it like chess and not checkers. It really requires you to build momentum and to keep that momentum going. You will notice when you do not do PR versus when you do. And one thing that I like to share with everybody that I do think falls under this, common misconception is people think that they only are doing PR if they're actively doing it. And if they're not, then there's no brand narrative. And I want to point out to everyone that you have a brand narrative, whether you're taking control of it or not. It's either you who's pitching the stories that you want told about your company to the media, or it is the internet coming up with how you are being portrayed online. And so I highly, highly recommend to the smallest businesses to the largest organizations, make sure that you are taking control of your public narrative. It is a very delicate bridge. I call it the bridge of trust. It's the bridge, PR is really that bridge of trust between your company and the public, and particularly people of the general public you want to reach. And if you're not taking control of that, Google is unhappy customers, some random review, whatever it is certainly taking control of it.
I find that I find that very interesting, and you're so right when you say that a review, because people only really complain if they have a complaint. Like they only will do a review if they have a complaint
Sure,
normally.
sure.
And what do you think? I mean, when you think about a small, medium-sized business, a small business who's starting out, most of the time they don't even think about a PR. What they do is they just go to social media. And how is going to your business different than social media?
I think that's an amazing question because I think people get those two confused. Earned media is what you share on social media. It's not social media. And actually, I think that's a good thing because, somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, they asked, how do we make sure that we're not getting negative press? And I think that the question was interesting because unless you're doing something really shady, and then I highly do not recommend reaching out to reporters because they will find it. You're working in a pretty controlled environment. They're going to ask you some questions. As long as it's not like an investigative piece, you're generally going to have positive press. Social media, you could say the wrong thing, put the hyphen in the wrong place, breathe on somebody funny, and next thing you know, it's like, a total, blowout in your comments. It's very, very different. So what I like to tell my clients is that media is where you engage with people in real time, but earned media is what you share on social media to engage with. So it is very different. It is more controlled. It is a little bit, higher level. Your social media posts aren't going to show up in Forbes, but a feature on how you started your company just might.
Oh, okay. I understand that. I can relate to that. I was just like figuring it, like actually, like me physically looking at Forbes, and so yeah.
Yes.
And I think that another thing that's important is that when people are reading Forbes is because they want to know more about this.
Sure.
Where in social media, it's just an endless scroll. Sometimes they just might be just wanting to look or decompress, and they aren't really looking at your content or what you're doing because they're looking for a coaching program or they're looking for this or that, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too that people, when they're actively reading something, I think people's brains are engaged differently than when you're doom scrolling at 6 o'clock after work. I just think you're reaching people at a different at a different peak brain, wave or whatever that is. But it's also more credible. There's a big difference between what Sally Smith on Facebook says about you versus an interview that a Forbes reporter took time. The real difference here is credibility, and it's third party credibility. Anybody could go on social media and make any claim. You can say whatever you want. You could say you're the best. You could completely lie about your product if you wanted. You cannot do that in the media. So social media it's a fun way to engage with your customer. It's a fun way to engage with your colleagues, but it is not vetted. It is not credible. When you have a reporter that has vetted you, that has vetted your company, and then they put something positive out, that is credible. That is something that people can trust. And that goes back to that bridge of trust analogy that I used a few minutes ago.
I love that. I love that. What would you say has been your biggest challenge so far, and how did you overcome it with your business?
I think it's a fascinating question. I think that building an agency and building any company, that's why I feel like I connect so well with my clients, with my founders, because I do PR for a living, but I'm a business owner. I understand the challenges of both. I know what it's like to build a company from the ground up. I know what it's like to wonder, like, where's payroll coming from? Like, I know all of those challenges. I think that the biggest challenge, though, was when you start a company, you're going to have a lot of people who say a lot of different things about what's the correct way to do things. And I have never been somebody that gives much of a care about anybody's opinion. But when we were building the agency at first, there was a lot of noise about what building a proper agency looks like. And it was really advised that, my role be very, very different than what my role currently is, to really step out of what's going on in the day to day. You hear a lot of people talk about hire fast, hire more, outsource this, outsource that. And yes, obviously you have to have a team and you have to have it, depending on your, company, you have to have those things. But I was deeply unhappy with that advice. And my clients were not really thrilled with that advice either at the time, because when you sit down to work with me, like, if you decide to work with Pink Shark PR, I am the person you talk to. And if I had told a colleague at the time, like, hey, I'm touching client work, or I'm working on some pitches with the team, or I'm doing whatever, they'd be like, you shouldn't be doing that. And so I was deeply unhappy building an agency in kind of the traditional structure until we gutted it and rebuilt it the way that I wanted to do business. And it has brought, 10x the opportunities, into our company. And I do things very differently than my colleagues do. And so my advice to people is, you already know how you want to build your business. You already know what's going to make you happy, how you like to work. You already know those things. It is very important that you don't just take idle advice, because you already know most of the answers.
I love that. I love that. I have about 25 years of manufacturing experience, and during the time when I had like multiple production lines and we were doing I do process improvement production projects, and when somebody said, "Well, this is the problem," and I would actually not just listen that this is a problem. I wanted to walk through and get a hands-on approach, and since I was so active with that hands-on approach, I was able to ask. Doesn't matter if the manager's, I'm a manager and then my supervisor's telling me something. I'm like, I don't want to hear you as a supervisor telling me. I want to hear from the artisan, the mechanic who's dealing with this issues. I want to hear from the quality inspector who's inspecting. I want to hear from them. I don't want third or fourth or fifth, down the chain telling me. I want to like be physically present, walk through it. One time I walked 57 miles by, over a period of time, just monitoring the parts. I'm like, okay, it's going here. We're spending, one part is going 57 miles. That's way too much. And so you don't really know that when you're not really being involved in the process. And the process improvement Lean Six Sigma world, we call that Gemba. You got to walk the walk, right? You got to walk through it. And so I think that that's very important, that when other people say, oh no, just do this or hire that, then you're not involved, and then you're kind of like at a distance. So you don't really get. I love how you said, once you're physically talking to the clients, you're the point of contact, then you feel like you have that more hands-on approach. and you can meet the client where they're at instead of, reading a report or what a client did say. You get to have that interaction with them, and I think that that's a personal touch that a lot of people don't understand. And so I can definitely relate that that's something I love personally. We talked before we started recording about even the client reach out. I like to personally, when somebody reaches out to me to be on my podcast, I'm the one that says yes. I'm not having a bunch, because I feel like I want to make sure that they're the right fit for me. Instead of,
Definitely.
being on a podcast all of a sudden, or I'm about to interview somebody and I have like, who is this person? I want to make sure that they're right fit for me too, because
Right.
it's my podcast, it's my brand, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to be involved.
I love that. So did you ever, when you started to build this company, did you ever have any doubt, fear, or even just experience any type of burnout?
Oh, I'm sure that I was burned out. Positive. I mean, yeah, sure. I am sure. But fear and doubt, that's really interesting. Like, of course, there's moments that come up with fear. Doubt, no, though. Doubt is really interesting because I feel like even in those really tough moments, you can still decide that it's going to work out. Like you can, so I would say that in moments, sure, I could be a short-term pessimist, but I was always a long-term optimist. I always was like, okay, maybe this moment sucks and maybe I'm feeling the anxiety of like how to figure out a situation or how to sort, whatever, challenge du jour was. But I would say overall, it was really important that I maintained a long term optimism. Today's problems will not still be here 2 months from now, And so it always helped me. Like if I was dealing with something particularly stressful, um, I definitely would think, oh, 2 months from now or a month from now, you're not even going to remember this moment. And thinking about like where I'd be a few moves down on the board was always super helpful in the really like, short term stressful moments.
I love that. I love that. And so how did you go through, like, what type of routines or did you do, or what do you do on a daily basis to help you stay grounded and just keep productive and like managing those chess pieces, not the checker pieces, so per se?
I think this is a really important question. And I think how I did this pre 2020 versus how I do this now is very different. So, um, up to 2020, 2021, I was not above, it's funny. I didn't overwork to the point where like, I mean, I was very protective of my weekends. And I definitely had to have downtime because you can't function. You can't hear your own brain if you don't. But I was willing to push myself. I was willing to skip breakfast. I was willing to run on 12 coffees a day. I was willing to do things physically that I would not do. And I ended up having some health complications, and I had a pretty major surgery in March. And it was really what I believe a culmination of just stress and not slowing down when I needed to. And even though I love what I do, you cannot run yourself into the ground. And I'm
Mhm.
finally starting to see the conversation change, which I think is so important. Hustling, hustle culture, like saying that, oh, I'm just gonna work 40 hours a day. And this is very popular in the startup community. Like I'm gonna work, more hours than there are on the clock. It's not a flex. What's a flex is getting 8 hours of sleep, showing up like your best self for your team and for your clients, not, running yourself into the ground. And so I cannot stress more that you are going to hear a lot and trust me, I work a lot. I'm not saying that I don't, but I work in a grounded way. I work in a smart way, and I prioritize health. If you prioritize your health, your business actually will go better. It absolutely will go better. And it is a lie that you have to run yourself into the ground to have a successful business. And that is really, really important. So today, I mean, these little things that I do, I'm very, very focused on making sure I get enough sleep. I'm very focused on making sure that I eat breakfast, that I don't jolt my system with, coffee right away. Like I'm very intentional about how I'm stressing my system, and I meditate religiously. 5 years ago, I would have probably rolled my eyes at you and been like, yeah, I know meditation's good, but it's really kept me rooted in every moment of my life, including my business.
I love that. I love that. And I also want to commend you. I mean, because most businesses fail within the first 5 years. Like they just go out of business. Like they don't really last longer than 5 years. And here you are with your company 7 years now. And I think that, so one, I want to say, congratulations to that because
You.
that's really hard to do. And not only that, we talked about you are from California, you're a female owned business. So all of these things, there's a lot of things that are make it hard for businesses to strive. And so one, thank you for that. And I also want to say, I agree that you cannot run yourself ragged because when you are so burnt out and all of the things, you're pouring from an empty cup. And when you're pouring from an empty cup, you're not the best self. You're going to have mistakes, which leads to rework and all these other things. So just, I'm a time management coach, and I hear all the time that people say, like, I don't have time. I don't have time. Really, you don't have time because you're not putting yourself first. And it's not to be selfish. Just is like, if you put yourself first, take care of your body, exercise, do all these things, everything will get, run very smoothly. It's like if you're constantly putting out fires, you can't even think. Your brain doesn't know how to shut down when it's trying to sleep. So there's all these simple things that you can do. And so I thank you for sharing that because I think it's so important. And we say that, a lot of people, high performer people, business owners, like yourself, that I find that are very successful are practicing these things that are so important for us to be able to be productive every day. So thank you for sharing that.
I appreciate your comments. And, I think sometimes for entrepreneurs, and I definitely was like this when I was younger, you think the word routine and you think boring. I didn't do well in typical structures. It's why I've never, I've waitressed and I've worked for myself. I mean, that's like, that's my career path. But as you get older, like committing to yourself and like honoring your word to yourself and holding boundaries for yourself, not because there's a client deadline, not because somebody asked you to, showing up and giving yourself a grown up routine that you stick to no matter what. It is one of the best grounding mechanisms, one of the best things that you could do for yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. Have those routines that anchor you and stick to them. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs are like, oh, so boring, but it is a lifeline. You will always feel purposeful. You will always feel balanced. You will, even in tough moments, you won't lose that sense of being. And it just helps you in order to be able to handle stress, you have to increase your capacity to handle things. And how you're able to do that is really rooted in the routines and the things that you set up for yourself. And so I can't stress that enough. And younger me is rolling her eyes right now at older me, but it's very true.
No, no, I appreciate that. And I love that you share that because when we grow up when we start, when we're children, that's what we learn. We learn routine and all these things. And then once we're an adult, we're like, screw routine. And then we're like, wait, it actually did work. And I am the same. Like my younger self, I didn't think about all the things I had to set in place. And then as I got older, I'm like, I got to have this in place, because then then you have your children, your marriage or whatever you have, like all these other things are coming. And if you can't learn how to balance it all, you're just going to fall apart. You're going to burn out. You're going to have added, stress, medical issues, which is going to lead to more issues. So it's really important to find that balance. Um, as,
Absolutely.
as we wrap up, though, I would love one before we go into my question that I love to ask all my guests. I would just like, how can people contact you? What is it? And I'll have your stuff in the show notes. But how can people contact you if they are wanting to work with you?
The best way to contact me is through LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn religiously. It's a great place to find me. So it's just my first and last name, Jenny Beres, at LinkedIn. I also have a Pink Shark PR page, but our website is pinksharkpr.com if you want to just put a formal inquiry in, but you're also welcome to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn.
I love that. I love that. And I'll definitely have that information in the show notes as well, links to your LinkedIn profile, your website, and things like that. But one of the things that I love to always ask my guests, and we kind of, I don't know, you might have already to touch on this because we've already talked about so many great things, but what is something that somebody can do today, anybody, my listeners out there, that can help them refine and shine today? A book to read, an action to take, maybe even get a routine set in life. Like, what is something that you would encourage them to do today?
So really, one of the reasons I reached out to you was because there is no, like, to refine and shine, there is no mechanism that helps that probably more than public PR, like being out in the world. So I would challenge all of your listeners to find a reporter that they really resonate with, read their work, see what they write about, see if it makes sense, for what you do, and reach out to them. You don't have to pitch yourself right away. In fact, I highly recommend that you don't. Just introduce yourself, comment on what you like about their work, reshare a piece of their work on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever it is that you hang out. Start building that connection. So read a couple articles and then introduce yourself to a reporter with a no strings attached
I
message.
love that. I love that. That's actually something I'm going to do today for
Oh, yeah,
myself.
I love that.
I love that because, like you opened my light into a lot of different things. And I think you used light when you reached out to me. But one of the things one about your story, and I kept hearing that, like keep hearing those little nuggets about sharing your story, because you started something for a reason. And a lot of people don't share who they are, where they came from. And that is how that you can build a resilience in yourself and, things like that. Showing like maybe through hard times, you don't give up, you're a fighter, things like that. And that's through the things that we went through in life. But another thing that you've opened my eyes up to is just like I've never even thought about contacting or looking at a writer. I mean, I've been featured in a few articles, but that was people coming to me. But it's like, wait, how can I showcase who I am and what I'm about? And that means I need to read or contact some great reporters who write really well and say, hey, this is who I am.
Yes. And one of the best ways to do that is to find headlines that they've written um, that you would have loved to have been included in, something that maybe a colleague has done or somebody that you really look up to where you're like, oh, I think they cover, and make sure you write within what we call your beat, within someone's beat. You wouldn't pitch, like for me, I wouldn't pitch a fintech story to somebody that writes about, cooking or
Mhm.
writes about lifestyle issues. So, you have to make sure you're matching who you are to the right reporter, but it is really fruitful to start building those relationships.
You just made me think of something. I did have an article written about me when I was first born.
Really?
Yeah, I was born at home. So the headline in the newspaper said Saturday Night Live because I was born at
That
home
is
on a Saturday
adorable.
night.
That is adorable. That is journalism at its finest, truly.
But I was just because you said the title, and I'm like, well, that's something I resonate. And I always remember what the title was because it was simple, easy, and it was a live birth at home. So it made sense.
I
But
love that. Yes, the title's everything. When we pitch reporters, we make sure that our subject lines sound like headlines they would have written. And a lot of times, if they do, decide to move forward, they'll take the subject line and use it as their headline, maybe with some tweaks. But our goal is to make their job as easy as possible.
I love that. I love that. Well, I thank you so much for this interview, and I cannot wait for this podcast to air and for people to connect with you because I think that you have helped so many people, and the listener who's going to be listening to this is going to be like, "Oh, there's some great things I need to start reaching out and read those articles. Take some time away from the social media and read those articles that people are writing and see how I can brand myself." So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angelina. This was amazing. I appreciate the conversation.